Welcome to the Brewers Weekly Rundown Podcast, a production of the Flicksation Podcast Network.
Brewers down to their final out now. Now up to Christian Yelich. Here it is. Yelich sends one to right center and deep. Get up! Get up! Get out of here and gone for Yelich. He has tied the game with a booming home run. He got it all. Tied up 4-4 on a big home run to pitch. Ryan Braun sends it to left center and deep. Get up! Get out of here! Gone for Ryan Braun. He just hit a walk-off alley. Wow! You can't do it any better than that.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the Brewers Weekly Rundown Podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Eric Madsen. I'm here at Flicksation Studios, P City, Wisco. I say that's Portage, Wisconsin, for anybody that cares. I probably won't mention that too much usually, but P City, Wisco here. Dr. Will Flanders from Milwaukee joining us tonight. Doctor, how are you?
Doing good. That's a great new intro you've put together there. It feels like a professional show now, and that was my first game in 2018, so that gets me pumped up even more. So good job
fantastic. Fantastic. From the D.C., Wisconsin area, Michael Smith with us once again. Michael, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, this is episode 2. We're recording this pretty recent to when it is getting released. We recorded episode 1 a few weeks ago. We had Scotty with us at the time. Scotty unable to join us, at least for the time being. So it'll just be the three of us going forward for now. Spring training is going. We've played a few games already. We have a few things. We've seen a few things already. Date right now, as of this recording, is February 27th. I don't know how, you never know how long it takes for these podcasts to migrate to the carriers, so hopefully it's not too far after when we record this that you actually hear it. You can check us out online. If you go over to Facebook, you can like our podcast page, Brewers Weekly Rundown. You can email the show, brewersrundown@gmail.com. On Twitter or Instagram, we're at Brewers Weekly. We have a voicemail line that you can either call or text anytime, 24/7. If you do leave a voicemail, please let us know if you don't want us to play it on the show. Otherwise, we will assume that you wanted your voice heard on the show. So give us a call or a text at 608-535-9302. And the podcast available on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Plex, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, as well as many other podcast platforms. All right, so we are here, episode 2, to talk about a few things. The focus of the episode is we're going to dig a little bit into the 40-man roster for the most part as we go along, but tonight we're going to talk specifically about the position players as far as the current depth chart sits, and we're going to talk a little bit about the probable rotation and the pitchers eligible to possibly do that. So we'll dig into both those a little bit later. Let's start the top of the show with just a few items of Brewer news that have come up since we recorded the first episode. First, guys, I don't think any of us are surprised at this outcome, but Josh Hader's arbitration hearing, he lost. The team successful on that, so Hader will get a $4.1 million salary this year as opposed to the $6.4 he was looking for. A lot of kind of interesting factors here. There's not a real model to base him on, but seems most baseball minds aren't surprised. I mean, these arbitration hearings are almost always weighted towards the team. So, Will, any surprises with this outcome?
Yeah, I don't think it was especially surprising that the team came out on top. I think what was interesting is there was a athletic article that kind of got into the nitty gritty of why these hearings oftentimes end up with a lot of bad feelings, and why a lot players and teams try to avoid them as best they can. There was some discussion that the comments he made back in the stuff that came out in the 2017 season or the 2018 season, the comments he made as a teenager were sort of brought up in the hearing, and so we were trying to figure out given that he's had an excellent season last year, home runs excluded, the numbers were still there, how he ended up getting the lower amount. It's possible that things like that potentially played a role. The other thing that was out there was that the arbitrators still don't seem to respect the modern game or understand the way the modern game is played. And the argument was he's not getting that many saves, so how much value can he actually have? Holding that against Hader the way he's used is a bit problematic. And I think these are the things that are going to be addressed in the upcoming CBA, getting a more sort of analytically minded approach to the arbitration hearings, or, maybe wholesale changes to the way the arbitration process works. But those were a couple of the interesting aspects in my mind.
I'm not totally surprised either, but, there's certainly a case where you could see him winning, but when you started to look across baseball and how few, if I think there is around the time Hader was successful, maybe like 1 out of 8 players or so had successfully won their case. But even Hader and Counsell himself both talked about after Hader lost his arbitration that the system is kind of outdated. It doesn't represent modern baseball, much as Will alluded to. And, I think with that agreement coming up and everything else that's looming, that's definitely going to be on a lot of people's mind. And just kind of lefty specialists in general don't seem to quite have the stock that they used to in seasons before. And Hader's obviously beyond that, but just that kind of role player that can do whatever you need him to do, whether it's 8th inning, 9th inning, maybe earlier in the game, maybe 7th inning, just doesn't seem to have the true value that he really has to the team.
All reports I'm hearing sound like there's no hard feelings and Hader's fine at camp. So knock on wood, let's hope that moves on smoothly, and let's hope Mr. Hader continues to deliver and gets himself a big deal, whether it be here or wherever next year. And definitely a possibility to be moved at the deadline, depending on the team's status at the time. So Brett Suter got his deal, guys. He got about $2.5 million deal for 3 years, some incentives laced in there. I'd say a pretty good deal here, both monetarily for both involved. So I was pretty happy with this. How about you, Will?
Yeah, I think, more so than anything with Brett Suter, he's the kind of guy you like to have on the team, right? He's a great, just add some fun to the season. But last year he established himself as an effective, pitcher as well. And I know it was a small sample size, but an ERA of .49 in his appearances at the end of the season. Great move all around, and glad to see Brent sticking around for a few subsequent years. I think it's, as you said, a good deal for both sides for sure.
Yep, definitely think there's a pretty good ceiling here with not a lot of risk involved. So, let's hope he holds as far as how he did last year, Mike.
I think he was an interesting case that they were ready to go to arbitration with him, but I thought they could probably work out a deal, which they did. I think realistically, if you look at it for the money, this may be the best deal the Brewers have on the roster. I mean, with incentives, he could get up to, I think it's close to about $3 million from the 2.5 he's at. But for a guy that could be penciled in as a number 5 starter, to a guy that's one of your really important bullpen pieces, and just he's such a team player and people really like him, and he is a real intelligent pitcher. He obviously went to a really good university as well, but his speed and his pace and the way he really broke down the game, and he looked at some fundamentals and sabermetrics and stuff when he was injured, and he said that really helped him. And then when he comes out and has that kind of ERA, it seems like that really was the case.
All right, so the Brewers kind of out of nowhere pick up possibly one of the best all-around utility men out there in Brock Holt from the Red Sox. Signed to a pretty affordable deal for the team, 1-year deal. And maybe he's going to be the fill-in pitcher when we need one of those. But, I mean, I wouldn't expect to see him on the mound or catching. But this guy can pretty much do everything. So I think another good signing here under the radar for Stearns.
I absolutely love this signing. He has so much versatility, and then on top of that, it's just definitely there's a lot of value there. I mean, he hit close to 300 last season. To just pick up one of those guys right before spring training, it's kind of mind-blowing that he was available and that worked. I think part of it, he's also a piece along with Sogard where maybe the Brewers move one of them if one of them really steps up, or if they're in a position where they're not doing as well. But I think too, it's maybe, some projections had Hira not being as successful as a hitter as he was before. And that really is a good, solid backup for him as well.
Yeah, I think all of that's right. I think, we're really getting the story of this offseason was building depth. And here was yet another depth piece, as Mike was saying, like, I didn't realize he was still out there on the market, actually, to see that this guy actually made it right up to spring training almost still available, it was quite a surprise. I mean, and it's not as if just last year was his only good year. He's had consistent seasons in the past with the, OPS over 700. Never going to be a full-time player, always going to sort of be a utility role or an off-the-bench guy, I think, to some extent. But definitely a good signing and building more and more depth. I think, as you said, he can sort of push Sogard and push Jerko and some of those other guys that we have that are also the depth at those positions. But we're building a really deep team. As we talked about in the first episode, the ceiling is a little bit lower, but the sort of consistency across the board, seems to have increased. And I think this is another signing that sort of fits that storyline.
All right, Will, and we just made a 5-year commitment with Freddie Peralta, of all people. I mean, I think we saw him at least earn his way. I think he finished the year off strong, mostly bullpen work, but we still have Corbin Burns, who gave us basically no sign of life at all last year. So, I mean, we knew Freddie Peralta was going to be around, but based on a strong winter performance, I think they cut him this 5-year, $15.5 million deal. So that was kind of a blindside, Will, eh?
I was totally surprised by this deal, especially, before we've seen any real in-season results. Maybe mid-season, if he was performing pretty well, you might see something like this. But, I guess they're really buying into the results that he had in the Dominican Winter League. He had exceptional numbers down there. He seems to have cut way down on the walks, whereas last year in MLB he was at like almost 4 walks a game. In the Winter League season he was down to 1.4. So that's a big change. Now, different level of competition, of course, you have to have that caveat on all this. His ERA was 1.35 during the Winter League season. So, it seems like he's found something. It seems like he's found the control that's been the thing that he's lacking in his couple season and a half of major leagues so far. And I guess they're sort of willing to take the risk. It's a win-win on both sides if he has any level of performance, and it's a relatively low expenditure to lock a guy in for several years that at least the Brewers internally seem to think has the potential to become a important part of the rotation.
This one didn't surprise me as much. There was a lot of people within the team that was really high on him, but I think anytime the Brewers can sign a pitcher for multiple years like that, who's kind of come up with them, and that they've gotten to see grow for about $3 million a year, I think you do that, 10 out of 10 times just on the value alone. If he doesn't quite pan out, there are other roles and things he could do in the bullpen or whatever, but I still think they definitely see him as a starter. I think also with that, there's a couple option years. They're a lot more expensive than the average yearly salary, but this could be longer than those years. It kind of reminds me also of kind of like Sheets or Gallardo when we had them earlier in their career, and then extending them for a longer period of time, kind of early on. Also with mixed results earlier on.
But definitely a smart decision for a team in the Brewers' position. All right, guys, so we've had camp now for a little over a week. We've had a few games. Ironically, the first game of camp was rained out. You don't see that very often. But that happened. I've had some split squad stuff here. So just throw it to each of you here. Mike, we'll start with you. What have you gotten out of camp so far? What's sticking out for you?
I think a few things. I was really curious to see how Pena and Narvaez would start off, and they've both started out pretty slow. Pena's gotten a couple hits now. I think Narvaez still is sitting at one, but the bullpen has looked really solid. I've been really impressed with the bullpen. The starting pitching in the 1 or 2 innings they've had haven't looked quite as good, but it's such a small sample size. There's not much to say. Arcia has come out, and he's looking like he's starting off pretty well in the spring here. Smoke looked decent early on, too. We had quite a few errors today, but it'll be really curious to see how it goes on. But I'm definitely really impressed with the bullpen. It's important to me that at least one of the catchers starts pretty hot, and that'll kind of maybe establish with who they put more weight on early on.
Yeah. Will, how is camp going so far?
Yeah, I think I was going to say Arcia was the most impressive to me so far. And, you got to be cautious with a small sample size. We've seen it from Arcia in short bursts, a couple times throughout his career. But, it seems to be the case that he's being maybe a little bit of a new approach. I've sort of watched, I watched the game today, and I was looking to see if his approach sort of his, at bats looked substantially different. I didn't really, couldn't pinpoint anything that was changed. Maybe a little bit waiting back on the ball a bit more, but the 3-run home run he launched today was pretty impressive. And you'd like to see him keep it up because that gives the team a lot more wiggle room in terms of folks like where we play Urias, and if Urias can maybe get a little bit more seasoning in AAA rather than having to be thrown in as the starting shortstop or maybe more in a backup role. So I think Arcia so far looking good, and just crossing my fingers that that's something sustainable rather than just one of his streaks. Because he seems to have the biggest problem is consistency in his at bats, right? He'll get on a good stretch, but he's not able to replicate it over time like the good hitters do, and that's where he gets it down to the Mendoza line and below. So just hoping that can continue for the long term for him.
Yeah, that's definitely who I had marked down here as being impressed with. Arcia, he's belted a couple home runs, looked pretty good. He's definitely going to get some time here at the beginning of the season based on Urias' injury. I agree. I think he should probably be well ready to go before they insert him in the lineup here. Even if Arcia gets hot early, I mean, I don't think they're going to give him much leash. So if he has a couple of bad games, he might be switched already. I'd love nothing more in the world than him coming around here. It's kind of getting late in the career, so how much is left here. But yeah, a lot of time and money and emotion invested into this guy. So thumbs up for him. Haven't seen much to talk about with the starting pitching, which is kind of where my interest has lied. Anderson got knocked around a little bit. I'm really curious to see how Lauer and Lindblom especially do this year. I think Lindblom is a huge wild card. It's not fared that well in the majors in the past, but yeah, hopefully he can have an Eric Thames style revival here. So yeah, pretty excited. We're still in the times where starters are only getting an inning and you're really not getting any sample size for anything more than position players. But yeah, so far so good.
And I just add with Anderson, I think even though he got knocked around a little bit, that's kind of the way he's always been as a pitcher. He's a guy that's not trying to strike you out, right? He's a guy who's trying to induce contact and get quick outs, and sometimes that leads to some ugly results, right? That's the problem with the pitchers that aren't going after the strikeout, is that when things go bad, they can go pretty bad. But I think that's pretty typical of what we'll see from Anderson. Some hits early in the at bats. Sometimes those will fall in. Sometimes those will go to the outfielder or the infielder and be an out. But I think that was pretty representative of what we're going to see all season from him potentially.
He went 2 innings today with only giving up 1 run, so he bounced back after getting pushed around earlier. Lindblom hasn't really looked good in either outing.
All right, guys, we'll get back to those two in a little bit here. Let's talk about the position players, the actual positions here as we look on to the 2020 season. We'll start at second base. That is the obvious one. Keston Hiura, of course, coming back for his sophomore season. We're hoping he can build on what he's done and get significant playing time without injury here this year, just to see what happens. I was looking at some analytics for him earlier this morning. He swings at least 70% of the pitches in the strike zone. He makes contact with 41% of pitches thrown to him outside of the strike zone. So he's really aggressive. Velocity off the bat, he was second only to Christian Yelich this year with the Brewers. And Yelich, of course, led the major leagues in that department this year. So here his hard hit rate is something like 40%. Sky's the limit with this guy, we hope. Of course, sophomore season, he's scouted now, so the cat's out of the bag. Just hope he can keep delivering. Will, what's your thoughts on Keston this year?
Yeah, I think he's all the signs point in the right direction. It's interesting when you look at some of the forecasters and the analytics like Baseball Prospectus. Those guys are a little down on Hira's potential this year from a defensive side of the ball particularly, but also because of the strikeouts and the swinging out of the zone that you alluded to a little bit, though maybe in a more positive sense. So it'll be interesting to see if he can develop a little more plate discipline. But I think the key for him is can he make improvements on the defensive side of the ball so that he can be a serviceable second baseman. He doesn't need to become a Gold Glove winner. He just needs to become a replacement level defensive player. And at that point, the sky's the limit, I think. And there's no reason to think that as a young player, there's not more room to improve in that direction. So I think he's obviously one of the best hitters we have. Maybe second after Yelich, you could say. I think is maybe the second best hitter at this point. But it'll definitely be interesting to see if he can continue it in his sophomore year. And exciting to watch.
It'll be interesting to see. As Will said, some forecasters had him pretty low. I saw some as low as like 250 or 255. That seems like quite a drop from what he hit last year. I think the defense will improve. We have to keep in mind that it's not like he played second his whole career or whatever. He just learned that really quickly, and I think he can only get better there. I think some of those question marks are also, possibly part of the reason besides just the value that we brought Brock Holden. If he has some struggles there early or whatever else, when he hits the ball hard, and when he swings and misses, he strikes out a lot. But so far, he's had pretty good success average-wise and power-wise, and I'm really excited to see Hiro almost just about anybody on our roster this year.
Yep, and he steals a good number of bases also, should be noted. All right, so moving to the outfield, guys, we've learned that Christian Yelich will play left this year, and I've heard a few explanations for it. I would just say it's mostly a health issue, so put him out there, keep him a little more healthy, hopefully. We're, of course, hoping to get a bounce-back season from Lorenzo Cain, of course, winning the Gold Glove last year, but offense a little on the rough side, pretty banged up all year, so Cain's somewhat returned to form and healthy this season is something the Brewers are definitely going to need. And we'll probably see Avisail Garcia play the bulk in right field. Ryan Braun, the fourth man here. Of course, Ben Gamel probably will also possibly be on the 40 or the 26-man roster. I don't know, but Yeah, so a pretty solid everyday outfield, I would say. Mike, what do you like here?
Adding Garcia is quite of a big improvement, I think, for outfield when you're thinking how could the Brewers improve their outfield much more than it already is, and then they sign him. I think the move, as you said, with Yelich moving over, uh, changing fields, it's probably for health too. I was really curious to see how Taylor would do, and now we've learned that he's pretty much out for the whole spring. So it'll be really interesting to see if we go with 4 or 5 or however many outfielders right off the beginning. I mean, Gamble, I can't say it. He's a sure thing, but it would be hard to imagine just going Braun, Kane, Yelich, and Garcia at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
I might be wrong, but I think Gammel's only got one option left, so not going to be hopping around as much this year. But I'm pretty sure he'll be on 26. That's my guess. But
Yeah, I think so. And one of the reason for for the switch, I think, is that Avisail Garcia has a pretty strong arm, and you need the arm more in right field than in left field. Health also being a reason. But Yelich is comfortable in left. He played a lot of left in Miami as well. The question mark in the outfield to me is, with what we saw with Lorenzo Cain last year, is that the beginning of a decline, or was that a product of the injuries that he had? The sort of regression on the offensive side of the ball, particularly. In the early days, the small sample size of spring training, today I guess is actually his first day playing. He looked pretty good out there, was able to get a hit. But that to me is the biggest outfield question mark: is will he be able to get back to what he did in 2018 a little bit, or are we sort of seeing the aging player that some folks were worried about when he signed the contract? That by the end of it, he might be a little bit of an older player and more of a liability out there. Defensive side, I think he's still very solid. But that's the biggest question mark to me. The other one being how much of Braun are we going to see in the outfield versus at first base, and we can probably talk about that more in the context of the first base position.
all right, so behind the plate, of course, we had the departure of Yasmani Grandal. Trade with Seattle got us Omar Narvaez. Good offensive upside here. Could definitely hit a lot of home runs from the left side here at Miller Park. Thought to be a defensive liability, especially bad at throwing out runners. Had an 18% success rate last year. Of course, Manny Pena, very solid on the defensive side and throwing out runners as well. I was expecting a much more heavy Narvaez side platoon this year. The way the spring is going, it's early, but it's like maybe not. I don't know. Right now, it looks like it could go either way. So I don't love the idea of Pena getting a lot of at bats against right-handers, but I don't know. I guess if you're hot, go with it. But I don't see that happening. But
I think it's really important that one or both of them has a really good spring. Narvaez had a pass ball charged to the pitcher that maybe a better catcher stops right in the first game, getting some rust off. He had 2 strikeouts today. Pena hasn't showed as much with the bat. He did have a hit today, so I think it's really important that these guys start hard. I see Pena starting pretty much against all the left-handers. How much more playing time he gets that, I think Council will probably go with the hot hand. Career-wise, he hasn't been as horrible against righties, but last season it was absolutely abysmal. But he was one of the best hitters on the team versus lefties, so and his defense is definitely a lot better than Narvaez. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, everything you guys said is right. I think even if Narvaez has a not so great spring, I think that he'll probably get the shot early in the year to be the primary catcher in the platoon situation, of course. I mean, last year with his 22 home run season, playing in Miller Park, there's the potential for even doing better than that. So I think, outside of late innings replacement for defense, putting Pena in there, although you don't necessarily want to use a backup catcher in a game all the time because you never know if he gets injured who can go back there. But I think I don't necessarily think that it's dependent on a good spring who'll get the most starts. I think Narvaez's track record in the previous year, in a decent performance in more limited time in previous years, I think at least to begin the year, I think he'll get the bulk of the playing time out there, even if he has a really poor spring training, which it's too early to even say that's going to happen.
All right, moving over to first base. Brewers.com lists the depth chart here as Braun Smoke. I think you can effectively flip that. So I expect Justin Smoke to get the bulk of the work at first base. Switch hitter, had a down year last year, but a very solid, consistent offensive player. Otherwise, I think, again, Miller Park will benefit him greatly. So hopefully Smoke has a really good season. Will, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think given that it's likely that Braun is going to struggle for substantial playing time this year. Barring injuries, I think Smoke is likely to get the bulk of the starts. Now, I mean, there's the caveat that his average and his on base percentage actually are pretty low. Last year down at 208. To the fans that are looking for batting average, I think that's gonna that'd be a red flag if he gets down there in the Shaw territory in the batting average. But he still showed the pop. Still over 20 home runs. So I think if he can get on base a little bit more, get that OPS up above 750, I think that Smoke will take the majority of the playing time. Though given that he's somewhat of a streaky hitter, there may be some opportunities for Braun that come up as well.
I just really like the fact that he's a switch hitter. You can look at that batting average at 208, but he did have 342 on base last season. And I think that's pretty good. He's career 324 on base, so his average career is only 231. But having a switch hitter first baseman definitely adds an advantage there. I think Braun will, as Will said, maybe struggle for playing time, but I could see him getting the nod in a lot of the matchups versus lefties. So it'll be interesting to see with who they go with early on and how they pick and choose from so many players that are all looking for playing time and all have a lot of depth and competition at multiple spots in the infield, really.
I think that's a good point about Braun getting some starts versus left. His average and on base percentage are pretty similar through against left and right, but his slugging is substantially lower against left-handed pitchers. So I think that's a great point that maybe that's where Braun's going to see some starts.
All right, we mostly talked about shortstop already, but obviously we're going to start the season here with Arcia. Urias right behind him. Urias also a good option should you have to lose Keston Hiura for any amount of time, or just give Keston Hiura a day off or whatever. I heard Urias is better as a second baseman than a shortstop, but there's no doubt why he is here. Anybody have any additional thoughts on the shortstop position?
Yeah, I think we mostly covered it. I think this is where we get into the huge depth position, right? Shortstop and third base. We have 4 or 5 guys that at least could theoretically at least take a turn at that position. At least 3, and that could regularly do it with Arcia, Urias, and Sogard. So I think that it may be a story of the hot hand. And, it may be the case that whoever is actually doing the best at the time is going to get the playing time. And given the streakiness we've seen from Arcia in the past, I think that's a likely scenario. Urias's injury is the kind of injury that I've read tends to sap power. So we may not get a huge power display from him this year. But in the minor leagues, he's been a consistent, 300 hitter, a guy who gets on base. So I'd suspect over the course of the season that we'll start seeing Urias more. But Arcia can save his job if he has a good year. Certainly, he can maintain the playing time if he's doing well.
I expect to see 3 or 4 players probably at least start at shortstop over the season. It's just really disappointing. Urias had the injury here and isn't able to do spring. I was really curious to see that competition between him and Arcia, but Arcia's looks like he's going to be who we start with.
So yeah, third base, the kind of most up in the air position here is depth chart here lists Sogard, Gurko, and Urias. Obviously, Ryan Healy an option there as well. Brock Holt also in the background here. So third base, yeah, he said 3-4 at shortstop. We could have 5, maybe more people start at the third base position as the year goes on. So I don't know. I can't imagine Sogard has a year resembling anything like last year. I hope he does. God, I hope he does. But I don't know. I see Jericho getting probably the bulk, at least at the beginning here. I don't know. Will, what do you think?
So in 2017 we had the whole nerd power phenomenon, and in 2018 we were sending him to the minor leagues. It seems like that he benefited substantially last year from the juiced ball. The power was there. It's as you said, I'd love to see it stick around. I'd love to see that continue. But I also think that Jerko is probably the best alternative. This is where spring training is a lot of fun. It's hard to envision how you can juggle all these players and not keep them all around, which obviously we probably won't keep them all around. But this is the depth story. This is where you see more than anything else the strategy of creating as much depth as possible. And it will be fun to see what happens. But Jerko would be my early favorite given his previous success in St. Louis particularly.
Yeah, before we picked up Jerko, I was thinking Sogard would maybe get more. But I think, again, it's going to be a hot hand situation. I could certainly see Sogard being put over there. I think they'll probably maybe mix power hitters a little bit more with less power hitters, depending on who's playing second and shortstop in a particular game. But so far, Jerko has looked pretty good in the small sample here in spring training.
All right, before we move into the rotation, do you guys have a dark horse? A lot of times you get a player that overachieves or really helps the team or has an unexpected lift of a year. So what do you guys think? What's your dark horse, Will, for the position players this year?
So I think that Ryan Healy is a potential, a potential guy that we should, be looking at substantially. He's had some good years in the past. He's, a guy that, he fits the profile of a lot of these guys. Is we just talked about the hot hand, and if he happens to be the guy that gets hot, I think there's the potential that he could see substantial playing time as well. There are a lot of guys here that have got up and down and streaky careers, and that lends itself to playing whoever's the hottest at the particular moment. And I don't think we should sleep on Healy. He's got the potential to have a decent season because he's got a track record that's in him to do.
I don't know that I can go quite as deep as that. I feel like we have a pretty good idea position players who's going to make the team, but I'm going to say Arcia. I'm going to say that the pressure's on him, and he hasn't performed up to expectations, even though he's a fan favorite. He needs to hit. His defense wasn't as good last season either, and now's the time for him to produce. If not, he has multiple guys gunning for playing time, and let's see if this is the year where he finally breaks out.
Yeah, that's what I got too. Arcia. His performance so far in the small sample has definitely pushed me that way, but yeah, I don't know. I have a good feeling. Hope the kid can pull something off here. So the safe pick here for dark horse, I think, for sure, of the guys that will make the team. All right, let's talk a little bit about the rotation. I'll just give you the 8-man depth chart here, listed on Brewers.com. Woodruff, Hauser, Anderson, Lindblom, Lauer, Suter, Burns, Peralta. I definitely think Peralta behind Burns is ridiculous, but he's probably, I don't know. I think he's in the 5-man starting rotation at the start of the season, but we'll see what you guys think. Woodruff definitely has the stuff of an ace, or could get to the stuff of an ace. Very solid. Hope to see improvement there as well. But like I said before, for me, it's Lindblom is the big wild card guy I'm watching. Anderson, we really hope he has a good season as well. Lauer, God knows what they'll do with Suter or whatever. And does Freddie continue his good spurt from the winter. Who knows? Will, what do you see as the 5-man, just eyeballing it, who's your 5-man rotation today?
Yeah, so I think given the recent vote of confidence that they gave Peralta with the contract, I think you have to put him in there as potentially making the rotation. So I'd have Woodruff, Hauser, Anderson, Peralta, and then it gets into a real toss-up because we have Suter here, we have Corbin Burns, and we have Lauer. And each of these guys has shown flashes. Burns is a reliever 2 years ago. Suter is intriguing to me in that he appeared to be most effective. The most effective Suter we've ever seen was the bullpen Suter. The Suter last year with the ERA of .49 out of the bullpen.
I have
it was a small sample size.
Not to interrupt you, but I have a bad feeling. I don't know, just the way he pitches, that he can't see the lineup even a second time. I just have that bad feeling. But
I think that's a good point. I mean, I think that's why he was effective as a reliever. When you have a guy come in throwing 88 after these guys throwing 95, the first time through the order, that's a little bit hard to adjust to. The second time they can sort of figure it out, right? And then they can tee off on him. So that's why I think that he might be best sticking to the relief role. I know he's been working on a changeup and trying to sort of add that to his arsenal. At least when they interviewed and when Sophia, he still said there's a lot of work to do there. So I think to get back into rotation, you might need to get that pitch working effectively. But I'd like him in the bullpen, I think, to start the year, and that takes one of these guys out of the mix at least.
I'm still not really sure yet. What you said, I definitely agree with the first 4, and then it's going to be kind of a wild card after that. I could definitely see all 8 making a starter multiple starts over the season, but who Council goes with is going to be pretty important right out of the gate. And I think last year I was pretty critical of the rotation he chose last year. He took Burns out of a situation that he was most successful in, and then we saw what happened as he went backwards last season. I would hate to see Suter in the rotation unless it was for an injury. I think he just offers way too much, as you guys said, and is way more effective in the bullpen. We have a little bit of depth here, but I can't imagine all 5 being good out of the gate. And I could see whatever the opening day rotation is changing multiple times, but it would be really good if it could be the right one to begin with. Hauser, I still have some question marks with him. He showed flashes good as both a starter and out of the bullpen. I'm not quite sure where he fits. Peralta definitely almost has to be in now.
How many times will Hauser vomit this year?
It's once a season, so we'll have to look forward to that.
Nice.
I would agree with that assessment entirely. I think that with Burns, could we put him back in the bullpen? I don't think necessarily. I mean, he wasn't any more effective in the bullpen. The question is, with Burns, is he even going to be on the team, or is he going to be starting the year in AAA? And I would imagine that's the more likely outcome. I guess we'll have to see how spring goes, and if he's rediscovered what he had in 2018, then there's the potential that he'll make the rotation. But with the sort of log jam we have, behind Woodruff, it's kind of a log jam of mediocrity. And if there was a move I would have liked to see the Brewers made, I really thought they were going to go after one of the sort of middle tier starting pitchers this year. I think they've crafted together a better rotation than maybe some of us expected when they didn't go after one of those big names. But it still is sort of as Mike mentioned, there's not much appreciable difference between a lot of these guys after Woodruff, and you definitely could see any of them, possibly with the exception of Burns, getting some starts throughout the year.
All right. So what does your gut tell you, Will, for Dark Horse in the starting rotation?
Well, I guess we'd have to go back to Burns, right? I think that we know that he can be effective, and we saw it out of the bullpen, in 2018, that he was an extremely effective pitcher. He's saying all the right things. Of course, you never know when they're saying that. It's what's said, right? You said you've worked on things. You've worked with a sports psychologist, and things are going to be different this year. You don't know it till you see it. But I think Burns would be a great dark horse pick, and just for his own, just as a as a player, as a person, you'd like to see him do better and overcome the sort of crazy downfall that he had. I don't really remember, maybe outside of Rick Ankiel, seeing a pitcher that was very effective collapses entirely as Burns did last year. So really hoping the guy can sort of be the dark horse and come through in either capacity, but in the rotation would be especially interesting.
Originally, I'd say Burns too, but I'm going to go with Hauser. When Woodruff first started with us, he looked pretty good, and then he looked like he got tired. And then last year, the steps he made just took it to a whole nother level, and I'd love to see that from Hauser. I also want to comment on Burns that a lot of scouts and people around baseball are saying he's really developing his slider better. He threw it like 10% less last season, and he has this huge spin rate on the fastball. It just wasn't getting much movement, but I do see him maybe being in the bullpen to start the year, and I think there's a lot of people similar to seeing good things from Peralta that seem pretty high on Burns right now. So we'll see what comes of that.
All right, and I guess I don't know how dark a horse it is, but especially with the recent signing, but I'll go with fastball Freddie here. Always really liked the kid. I was kind of bummed out how last year was going there for a while, but yep, he's going to bring it this year, guys. He's going to bring it. So I guess we'll talk about episode 3 here coming up next week sometime. Episode 3, I think we're going to get into the new rules that were announced by Major League Baseball a couple of weeks ago. So we'll dig into those a little bit and how they affect the Brewers specifically. We will talk about the bullpen and take a comprehensive look at the relievers this year. So we'll get into them like we did with the other things tonight. And who knows what else will come up news-wise. And we'll, of course, look at camp again. That and probably, who knows, much more on episode 3. Thanks again for listening, everybody. All right, like I said, email the show, brewersrundown@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram @BrewersWeekly. Voicemail line, call or text anytime 24/7, 608-535-9302. All right, my name once again, Eric. You can find me on Twitter, Hazer, HAZER75, or any number of my other shows on the Flicksation Podcast Network. We talk movies, we talk TV. Check me out over there. Will, thanks for joining us as always. Both of us kind of getting over some sickness, sinus issues for me and stuff, but finally we're able to pull it back together, Will, here, and get the show going again.
Absolutely, as long as it's not coronavirus, I'm still alive and doing well, so I'm
Right.
grateful.
For sure. And Mike, thanks, man, for joining us as always. Been a pleasure.
Thanks again for having me. Looking forward to a happy and healthy spring for everybody.
All right, I think for the duration of the spring at least, probably be a little sporadic on what day of the week the podcast gets released. But once the season gets going, we're going to try and stick to a more firm schedule. So just check for us every Thursday, Friday or so, and we should be around at that point. But thanks for listening once again. Give us a lofty star rating or a quick little review at any of the podcast carriers that you get this show from. That would help other folks find the show. And tell your friends to listen to the Brewers Weekly Rundown. We will talk to you guys in a week. And thanks. We'll check you later. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Brewers Weekly Rundown. It is a 2020 production of the Flicksation Podcast Network. We will see you next time.